Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle, chapter president. Wanted to welcome everybody to tonight's event, all our PRSA members, future members, and students. Thank you for joining us for communicating about the vaccine rollout, a fireside chat with Moderna's corporate communications director, Colleen Hussey. We hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation, and if you're not currently a PRSA member, we hope you will consider joining. Visit philly.org for more information, and after the presentation, I'll go over some of our events that are coming up this summer. So with that, I'll turn it over to Shari.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Rosen. I'm the PRSA Philadelphia Programming Chair. I'm really excited to host this chat with Colleen. Me and Colleen are both alumni from the same college, and I randomly reached out to her on LinkedIn, and she kindly agreed to do this, so I'm really excited. So just a little bit about Colleen before we get started. Colleen, as we mentioned, is the Director of Corporate Communications at Moderna, where she is responsible for external media relations, PR, and social media for the company. She joined Moderna in August 2019. In this role, she helps tell Moderna's story to external stakeholders. Prior to joining Moderna, Colleen spent 3 years on the communications team at Abiomed, a medical device company in the cardiology space. At this company, she planned and implemented internal and external communications initiatives and contributed to the company's patient advocacy and outreach program. Prior to moving to Boston for this role, she lived in DC, where she spent 3 years at Academy Health, a health services research and health policy association, and 3 years at the American Society of Clinical Oncology. She recently received an MBA from Johns Hopkins Carey School of Business and received a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from Johns Hopkins University. So as you can tell, she has a lot of free time on her hands. So hopping right in here, Colleen, can you tell us, just to set the stage, a little bit about your day-to-day role at Moderna, the role you played in communicating about the vaccine rollout, and just a little bit about how you decided to join Moderna and your team?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Sherry, for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you guys this evening. So a little bit of on my day-to-day role, maybe to start. As you mentioned, Sherry, I was hired in August of 2019. So before COVID was on anybody's minds. And I was hired to manage our external communications. So, regular media relations, PR, drafting press releases, staffing interviews, working on, at that point, a lot of longer lead time pitches for the company, and really kind of helping to try to educate the world about Moderna and mRNA, and all the things that Moderna had in the pipeline at that point. When I was hired, we had 2 really exciting phase 1 readouts that happened in September of 2019. So we were kind of just scratching the surface with our clinical data at that point. And at that point, we had also opened up our manufacturing facility, which is out in Norwood, Massachusetts. So a lot of my role was spent trying to convince reporters to come out and see what we were up to out there. And again, just trying to kind of educate the world at that time about mRNA. This was before mRNA was more of a household word, or a word that people actually understand like it is now. And then I think, Sherry, your second part of the question was about the role I played in communicating about the vaccine rollout. So yeah, it was, my team and a lot of other stakeholders in the company, but it was our responsibility to help draft all of the communications materials, I think mostly press releases at that point, about kind of what we were up to. This is starting in the beginning. So in January 2020, we issued our first press release that we were working with a group called CEPI about on a vaccine for what wasn't called COVID then, but what ended up being COVID, or SARS-CoV-2. So since then, it just more sharing information as we kind of developed more of the vaccine and had more data available.
Mm-hmm. So I know a big thing a lot of our team talks about, and a lot of our members, is that, they're part of an organization where maybe it's like a few people on their team. They manage a lot of different responsibilities, wear a lot of different hats. So can you tell us a little bit about your team and the makeup of your team at Moderna?
Yeah, sure. I like to say that we're small but mighty. So I'll start with that. So I feel like a kindred spirit to a lot of your members who wear a lot of hats and have small teams. We are a global communications team of 3, believe it or not, and have been through the work on COVID, on the vaccine. So it's myself. I report to our Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, Ray Jordan, and I have another colleague who manages internal communications for the company. So we were certainly wearing a lot of hats, and like I said, I certainly feel for the people who on the line who have to do the same. And I'm sure most of you guys would probably agree that collaboration and obviously communication within your small teams was and still is extremely important to us.
Wow. Yeah. So that's not, when I first heard this from Colleen, I was pretty surprised. I would have imagined it was an enormous team, but really producing fantastic work during the pandemic and really showing the value of something we really talked about was Moderna went from an impressive company to really a household name. So just, skipping around a little bit, what was that experience like? I know some of our team members reached out and were really curious, to hear how your communications evolved during that time and how your work really evolved as you went from being a company people knew to a household name that everyone was talking about.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll try to do it justice with my answer. I think the less that I've focused on Moderna being a household name, the better off I was through a lot of this. I think throughout our work on a potential vaccine for COVID, and especially while COVID was really, really scary and devastating people and communities in the United States and obviously abroad as well, I think it was super important for us to be communicating with the public as much as possible. And I think that included when we didn't have an answer, we were okay, and we got ourselves comfortable with saying, here's the situation at hand, whether it was, before we had the vaccine efficacy number or, during the development process, like, we don't know what the answer to your question right now, but we are working to address it. And so we really had to kind of get comfortable communicating, even though, it's not always easy for us communicators to say, I don't know. But we really got comfortable doing that as a company. And then we followed back up on our words. So when we said we didn't know, but we would get back to whether it was a reporter or the general public, we really did, at the next time that we had data or something to share, it was important for us to follow back up on our word.
Yeah, that's great. But something you mentioned that really stood out to me was, as you learned more, right? And I think for everyone who's listening to this, there was so much information being sent out and we were learning more day by day. So what was it like, working on the communications while working, alongside the different changing regulations from federal and local governments, and even just, employer-wide changes, masks, no masks, 6 feet, no 6 feet, it's okay to be inside, it's not okay. How did your communications evolve, and what was the process like working on that as a team?
Yeah, I think one of the maybe challenges, but also opportunities we had was that there were a lot of stakeholders involved from the very beginning. From the beginning, we had CEPI, we also had NIH, because the NIH led the phase 1 study. And then we eventually had BARDA, another government agency, and obviously both administrations have been, super hands-on, particularly with OWS, or Operation Warp Speed, sorry. So I think the opportunity of that was that we always had someone to go to. And so even when there weren't answers and when things were evolving and we didn't know how this virus was spreading or how to prevent it or how to keep each other safe, we did have the benefit of having, different stakeholders in different aspects of the fight against COVID. So that definitely helped us. I think from an employer communication perspective, we assembled a COVID-19 response team, I think like a lot of other companies did. And so that was a cross-functional group whose job was, they actually met every morning at 7 a.m. For a very long time to, assess, the last 24 hours worth of news and worth of updates and make sure that we were continuing to keep our employees safe, especially because we had people, essential workers who were manufacturing the vaccine who had to go to our manufacturing facility every day. So it was super important for us to kind of stay on top of that and protect them as much as we can, or we could at that point. And then I think lastly, I would probably just say something that I think will probably become a theme of a lot of what I say tonight is the importance of transparency. And even when there was, misinformation or, just no information coming out of, certain different groups and maybe the US government at a time, we were committed to being transparent. So from the very beginning, this was top of mind for us. And then throughout the process, especially as we got into the phase 3 study, that theme of transparency was just paramount. And of course, with transparency comes communication. So we were trying to communicate with our stakeholders as much as possible, whether that was through press releases, through investor calls, through interviews, and making it more accessible to the general public. But we wanted to make sure that people felt like they had the information, all the information available throughout the process, so that if and when the vaccine was authorized, they would feel empowered to make a decision to get vaccinated.
Yes, so something you mentioned a lot just now is stakeholders and really the involvement of all those key stakeholders. And so I know in this particular situation, there was a lot of confusion or worry. And so how did you instill a sense of confidence with your key stakeholders using communications, especially since I know there was a lot of concerns that were constantly being voiced about how quickly the vaccine was developed and put into market. So how did you use communications as a way to really instill that sense of confidence?
Yeah, that's another great question. It's funny because at the beginning of all of this, and I'm talking back in January, February 2020, the concept of speed and the concept of doing what we did rapidly was a buzzword at that point, and that was okay because we wanted to show like, okay, we got the sequence in 42 days, we had the vaccine, and I think it was 63 days we dosed the first participant in the phase 1. And so that, you would see that a lot in our communications, whether it was in Stefan, our CEO's quotes and press releases, or I think even in social media posts, we had an ongoing timeline of like each step of the development process at the time. And then we learned that concept of speed, Sherry, to your point, was scaring people, and they didn't realize that, yes, it was only 42 days that we, got the sequence and developed the vaccine. But before that 42 days was actually 10 years in the making. And that Moderna was founded 10 years ago. And so I think from a comms perspective, we pulled back on using those words rapid and speed in our content. And we started saying things like as fast as was safely possible. And that's a small nuance, but it actually really, I think, helped instill some confidence that, yeah, we moved fast because the pandemic was, like I said, devastating the world, but we did it safely. So that was one thing. And then I think the other really important thing to know is that, yeah, Moderna was thrust onto the main stage, and into the public eye very quickly, but the company had been working on the mRNA platform and its technology for 10 years. So while it did appear that we did this very quickly, it was a product of all the research and all the amazing science that the company had been working on. So again, we tried to pull different aspects of content that showed that, that breadth of research that the company had, and put that out there. I think one opportunity and challenge that we had, and I think this would probably resonate with a lot of people on the call, is that we have a great problem to have. We have so much content, but the issue is that the content is in like 100 different places. And so during the pandemic, when we were trying to instill this confidence in people, we actually had to go and look for this information. Like we knew it was out there, but the question was, where was it? So I'll give you one example is we had a partnership with NIH to work on preclinical studies on a vaccine against MERS, which was another very similar virus to SARS-CoV-2. And we would get all these reporter questions like, okay, where is this data? Where is this data? And finally, we found the data, and it was in an investor filing in one of our S3s. And so it was, of course, a reporter wasn't going to look there for, preclinical data. So it was like, okay, how do we pull the relevant pieces of the story out and present it in a way to reporters so that they could report to the general public about again, all that research and all the history and really how Moderna got there. So it was, it was a little bit of just kind of doing some detective work. And then, again, those small nuances in the way we were communicating, I think were really important to try to instill confidence.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly interesting because a lot of times if you bring a new message to the market, you have time to, test trial it on different audiences and see how they react. But in this situation, you don't. And like I believe Lori in the chat said, those nuances at such a particularly scary time make all the difference in the world. And so just, having to take those learnings on the spot as a communicator and apply them to really increase confidence and better portray your message, I think is just a fascinating thing and an opportunity to, really learn and evolve on the spot. But something else you mentioned while you were talking was really, nuances and cutting through and providing that research and, backing up the data of all the research in 10 years, a decade of that experience. So what role did you play, if you can speak a little bit more, in helping to dispel some of the misinformation surrounding the virus? I would say probably earlier on in the pandemic, during some of the most heated times.
Yeah, I think during those times, looking back on it now, it really wasn't, I think we didn't feel it was our place to try to kind of address any of those because we didn't really know, what was misinformation at that point. And so, one thing that our comm strategy was really to just keep our heads down and focus on what we were doing, which was working on an mRNA vaccine, and try to just kind of like stay away from all of the other, swirls and headlines that were happening. I think doing that actually helped our credibility because it kind of wasn't in our, on our realm or in our swim lane, if you will. So we really kind of just tried to say like heads down and work on the vaccine. And we would even at times throughout the response to the pandemic, just pull back on interviews. And we went through, very quiet periods where we wouldn't do interviews or kind of engage because we were just really trying to focus on getting the vaccine through the phase 3 and, hopefully and ultimately through the EUA authorization.
So, I know a lot of us are communications professionals and PR professionals who, like a media interview is always such a big win, especially with a big publication. So how did your team go about deciding when it was time to maybe be a little more quiet on the media front and when it really added value to go run forward and get the coverage?
Yeah, I think for us, and this kind of goes to the spirit of the company even before COVID, the data always has driven us as a company. So so certainly, the readouts that we had, and as soon as we got the data, we basically communicated it. Obviously, they'd have to, there was data cleaning and whatnot that happened, but so we were just guided by the data points, and so and I guess and the other milestones, when we finished enrolling the phase 3, we announced that. When we started various different phases, we announced that. So for us, the data was really kind of what drove us. And then there were, I think there were probably times where sometimes the data, and I will say our press releases are very scientific. So so interviews really do help, I think, because when you do an interview, and I'm really lucky because we have some really talented and amazing spokespeople for the company. And just hearing them talk about something very scientific, and they're talking to, a reporter who maybe isn't even a health beat reporter. I really think there was a lot of value in that because, if, your friend down the street pulled open our press releases, they probably wouldn't understand necessarily what the press release was saying and how it applied to them. So, so interviews, I think, were super important in our communication strategy, and we were really lucky. I mean, everyone wanted to do interviews with us, and so, we just honestly, because we have such a small team, there was just some times where there just weren't enough hours in the day for our spokespeople to do interviews. So, so I think it was just trying to be strategic, and again, like if we didn't have time to get to one reporter in one instance, making sure that we got to them in another instance, and hopefully we did that okay.
Yeah, and what's really interesting was earlier on you said that when you first started at Moderna, you were struggling to get people out to the facility. And it sounds like, by the time you're speaking about, it's such an influx and it was just a 360-degree shift where, Moderna is a household name. Everyone wants to know what's going on with the vaccine, the latest and greatest numbers. And really your role completely evolved as a result of this pandemic and your team's responsibility. And so when you agreed to speak, one of the things that I was super curious about is a lot of us do communications that are more business focused. And a big thing is that there's always going to be a topic where maybe you're writing about something and maybe you yourself personally don't hold that belief. Now, I can't think of a topic where there's more heated opinions than the pandemic over the past year of what you believe in, what you don't believe in, what you agree with, government wise, regulation wise, and what you don't. And so for me, I was curious, how did you develop your communications in a way to ensure that your personal opinion did not at all interfere with what you were working on from an educational perspective?
Yeah, it was hard because we were working on this vaccine through the really 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 scary time of the pandemic, where it was scary to go to the grocery store, and again, there was just not enough information. So I think, I guess personally, how I kept my personal belief out of it was just to remember the mission, even as cliche as that sounds, was just remembering that I had faith in what the company was doing, even if the vaccine ended up, for some reason not working, or it just for some reason didn't work out the way it did. I knew that we had every good intention in what we were doing, and that just gave me hope throughout the whole thing. So even when I had maybe personal disagreements about some of the things that were happening in our country, I think just that sense of hope kept me going. And I did live in DC for 8 years, so I think just the political aspect, we just were like trained not to talk about that at all. So and I think that the other thing is that we had government partners with the government, and some of those partners had been working through many different administrations. So I remember one of my key contacts told me that she's like, I've been here for 4 administrations and I'll probably be here for another 4. So you just kind of have to roll with it. And so, working with people like that really helped. And again, just kind of knowing that hopefully we were doing something that might end up working and helping people.
Well, as Tom Wright said in our chat, bless you for, I guess, the 8 years in DC and that experience. But I think something that you said that was really interesting is that, culture matters. And it sounds like because you believe in Moderna's culture, you were able to really stay the course during a time when personally maybe you were dealing with challenges or uncertainty like everyone else, that it gave you that sense of certainty. So I guess, just more generally, how would you describe Moderna's culture as a company? And what do you think, really from that culture guides your communications?
Yeah, I love talking about our culture. It's one of my favorite things. I think, so we have 4 core values that I know, some companies just kind of use them as a crutch, and they don't really, they talk the talk, they don't walk the walk. That's totally not Moderna. We really live and breathe by our 4 values. Those are collaborative, curious, relentless, and bold. And I think the COVID experience really helped me be relentless. And actually, one of the boss who hired me, who ended up leaving the company, but when we would talk about our values, she would say, I think the relentless one might be really hard for you. And that was so true. I was just not great at being relentless for some reason. It just didn't, I was kind of like an introvert and don't like to make a big splash. But I think COVID, from a comms perspective, gave me the opportunity to really learn how to be relentless, because it really was relentless communication. It was just, we wanted to, that transparency. We wanted to give the public the information that they needed to give them hope that, between any company, whether it was Moderna or any of the other companies working on a vaccine, that one of them would hopefully work and that we would see the end. And and people's losses would hopefully be eliminated. So so I think from a comms perspective, relentless became really, really important. And then of course, collaborative, and I think curious kind of go without saying. Curious is super important to us because we are such a small team. I think at the time of in our COVID response, we only had 800 people at the company total. We've since doubled in size as of March 31st, 2021. But without being curious, I think we could have failed because it was okay in all of the hurry and the stress to stop and say, is there something we could be doing better? Is there a process that we can fix or make easier for our stakeholders? And that was true for communications too, because with every press release, it's obviously involves comms, but also our colleagues in legal, our subject matter experts on the program team. I'm sure there are others that IR, so there were a lot of stakeholders involved, and I don't think we could have gotten to where we got without being curious and just saying like, okay, what if we did this? Even our science team, like, what if we change one thing? Will that change the vaccine's effectiveness? And then bold and collaborative, just kind of complement that. So I think we kind of felt, or at least I'll just speak for myself, I felt more than ever that we were like a family, and we had this project that was going on, and that was the vaccine development. And I think it really brought us closer in a way, even though we were working a lot and working really hard, especially the people in manufacturing. But I think it really kind of brought us together because we all felt like collectively we were trying to fight against this horrible virus that was spreading.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you maybe one or two more questions and then go to Q&A from the audience. So
Okay, great.
everyone on the line, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. But you mentioned while you were just speaking competitors, other vaccines. So I'm just curious, did you view that more as a competition or more as a collaborative effort towards defeating the virus? How did that really work since, there's the big players, right? Moderna, Pfizer, J&J. How did you really look at that as a communications team?
Yeah, I think from the beginning, it was really important for us to communicate that we didn't see other companies as competitors. And we knew that even if Moderna succeeded in bringing forward a vaccine that was, worked against COVID, we would not be able to supply the whole world, and neither would some of the competitors. So we were fully rooting for and really kind of supporting from the sidelines other companies all along. And I think that is very apparent from our from the interviews that we were doing at the time. It was never, we were never kind of like bashing or even commenting on other companies' strategies because all we knew was our own strategy. But again, I think Pfizer and BioNTech having an mRNA vaccine, it helped, because now the world does understand mRNA, or hopefully will understand. So it was really more of a, all hands on deck. And from the beginning, we said any vaccine available is the best vaccine you can possibly get, because again, we knew that that we would need more than one on the market to try to end the pandemic.
Yeah, that's something that we talked about that a little bit before this, but I think that's something really important for everyone to hear, just the view as there's always that conversation, right? When you're doing interviews of how do you refer to someone else's work who's competing against you? And I think just the model of it's a collaborative towards a greater good is just something really nice to hear. Even though these are all large businesses, obviously you have a vested interest in these vaccines. So in terms of two other things, then I'll go to the Q&A because a lot are coming in. So thank you guys. That's awesome. I'm glad everyone's super engaged. Okay, so communications needs. So my question for you is, what communications needs surrounding the vaccine do you see coming down the pipeline? And then just what are some of Moderna's other upcoming priorities?
Yeah, sure. I think clearly the topic of boosters, I think, is on everyone's mind. When might a booster be needed? Are boosters needed? So I think in terms of the COVID response, we'll continue to see that popping, and hopefully we'll get some guidance from FDA and CDC on that. But I think that that's probably a topic. And then I think what's next for Moderna, we have 23 other programs in our pipeline. And so, I think right now we're trying to focus on using this opportunity where people do know the company to educate the world on what else we're doing. We have a really exciting cardiology mRNA that we're studying where mRNA is injected directly into the heart after CABG surgery to try to regrow blood vessels, which actually kind of sounds like science fiction, but it's kind of cool. It's in a phase 2. We have a whole oncology program, including our personalized cancer vaccine, which actually was what set us up for success in developing the COVID vaccine so quickly, because we were, with a personalized cancer vaccine, you have to go from needle to needle. So the biopsy, develop the mRNA, and inject the mRNA back into the patient quite quickly. So that kind of gave us the grounding to create the COVID vaccine so quickly. And then we have a whole rare disease program as well. So I think we're really committed to trying to address unmet needs. And believe it or not, even in 2021, there are a lot of viruses for which there are no vaccines, and solutions for rare diseases where a child might be born with one missing enzyme in their liver, so one tiny missing part component, and their only solution is to have a liver transplant. And so we are trying to use mRNA to teach the body to generate that enzyme to prevent the need for a liver transplant. So I think we're really looking forward now and hoping to use the platform that we have and the visibility that we have to keep educating the world on mRNA overall.
Yeah, so before I hop into the Q&A, one quick follow-up. You seem to know a ton about mRNA and all the scientific research. Before you started working, did you have any sort of science background, or did you more so learn it on the job?
I learned it all on the job, actually. Yeah, so, and then even before joining Moderna, I had 3 years at Abiomed, and I had some amazing teachers teaching me about cardiology, and kind of was able to participate in some of our sales teams training, which actually really helped me from a comms perspective, because just like the sales team, I actually had to communicate kind of similar messaging, although not to healthcare professionals, to the media. So that was helpful. But yeah, when I joined Moderna, I started from the ground up, and I just tried to meet with a lot of different people and do a lot of reading and take the time to try to understand the material and ask questions. And I'm just scratching the surface even now. So I have a lot more to learn, but yeah, I've been really privileged to have some great teachers and mentors to help me along the way.
That's awesome, because I think for me, that really instills a sense of confidence of, hey, like really as communicators, we can work in any industry as long as we're willing to learn and grow. We don't need to have that kind of, more formal training. It's more the communication skills and then getting that subject matter expertise on the job. So that's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I echo that. And I think if you have your core competencies in corporate affairs or communications, PR, that's transferable. And at the end of the day, if you're a good communicator, even if you're in business or financials or technology, if you're interested in life sciences or biotech, I think, I don't want to say it's necessarily easy, but I think it's not so dramatic as people think it is to kind of break into that particular industry.
That's awesome. So I know we have a bunch of questions. So I want to go to them, make sure we have time for everyone. So the first question I have is regarding your team and the small size of your team. So do you think that working together as a small, super focused team was actually an asset in a way? I'm a small business owner and also a team of 3, and found that we could be much more intentional with marketing, sales, and PR.
I totally agree. Couldn't agree more. I think it ended up working out to our advantage to have such a small team, because when we were working on, urgent press releases or, media responses to inbounds, I would just pick up the phone and call Ray, and he does the same. And, we kind of just like know each other's style of working. And it's not like I have to go through, layers and layers of people to be able to just keep executing on what I need to do for my job. So yeah, I totally agree. It's a great point.
And so regarding that question, did you have like a key core task force that needed to sign off on things to make sure that things moved really quickly?
Yeah, we actually had set, previous to COVID, I think this is from maybe around the IPO for Moderna, they had a disclosures and announcements working committee. And so that committee was already, the ones who were approving press releases, approving disclosures. So they were kind of all set up. And so because we had again, it was a relatively small group with all of our key stakeholders, even when we had to go remote, it felt pretty seamless because we were used to working together as a group. We knew each other's roles and responsibilities. And so we would just hop on a WebEx and, I would share my screen and, sometimes we would go through press releases line by line. And, but we got people's feedback and then we were able to execute on them.
See, that's pretty amazing to me because I would think based on all the communications coming out, it would be this like large team, a lot of bureaucracy and levels. And it's just fascinating to hear about the small team, the quick decision making, and like anonymous attendee number one said, the effectiveness of getting that all done. So another question now from anonymous attendee number two. How will your communications evolve to address challenges such as vaccine hesitancy? We were only 50% vaccinated and the Delta variant is taking hold in 2 weeks. I am bracing for the worst and wish vaccine manufacturers would take the lead in communications to improve the vaccine hesitancy problem.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's a topic that is very top of mind for us as a company, I think. I think I would say that given that we are in an emergency use authorization or an EUA period, we are relatively dependent on the government and the FDA and CDC in particular to help because we can only say so much. I will put in a plug for my marketing colleagues who did an amazing job on a campaign that we call Make It Yours. And so that in that campaign, we were trying to show the personal reasons that people would get vaccinated. So, it might be like, my mom's a nurse and I want to, go hang out with my mom and feel safe about that, even though she's still going into the hospital and treating patients. Or, you might be a grandmother and you wanted to go travel and see your grandkids who you haven't seen in a while. And so we're trying to do things little by little to try to combat the vaccine hesitancy. And again, that transparency that we were trying to do through the phase 3, we were hopeful that would help too. But yeah, it's definitely something that's top of mind for us as a company.
So another question we had from another anonymous attendee is that there's some breakthrough cases of COVID and there's some noise of people saying vaccines aren't effective. So how do your communications plans address some of these different issues?
That's a tough one. Yeah, I think at this point, I think we're trying to. I think this question ties into vaccine hesitancy. So I think I would answer this by saying we're trying to kind of go into a more community level at this point because we know there are certain geographical areas that are more hesitant. And so I think, trying to structure our comm strategy to really get regional, and it's almost like opposite thinking in a way because just because our CEO might be on CNBC doesn't mean that that's reaching someone in a rural population who clearly doesn't watch that programming. So we're almost trying to like focus on national for sure, but also go really, really deep into regional to try to make sure that those people feel like they have the information that they need to make the decision to get vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. And are you seeing something I'm curious about, at least I'm seeing in my current role, is that regional is becoming increasingly important, especially because COVID has shown the difference in state and city guidelines versus federal. And so a lot of people are now paying a lot more attention to their more local publications. Are you guys seeing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's almost like thinking through all of your, and I guess this probably sounds obvious, but all of your target audiences. So even when we look at the 18 to 24 demographic, when President Biden announced that the administration wasn't going to meet their July 4th 70% vaccinated number, I remember watching the news that night and it was reported that it was, to some degree, because of the 18 to 24s, year-olds being hesitant. And so again, like even treating them as a subset, we know that they're not watching CNN all the time. So where are they getting their information, and how do we like really meet them where they are in a way that they like to, digest information? So I think like the regional and like the super targeted approaches, I think that's probably here to stay, especially as, your communities were so important throughout the pandemic.
Definitely. And so just one question I have for Marion is, did you have additional folks helping out your team of 3 with the press releases, social media, et cetera, or was it just the 3 of you?
It, believe it or not, it was a lot of times just the 3 of us. I think during our response to the pandemic, there were so many data coming out. There were like things were changing so often that it would have been really, I think, really hard for an agency to try to keep up with that. And again, like it was just, the way that the company and the way that we were kind of communicating on behalf of the company was so important at the highest levels throughout, that it was almost just kind of easier to do it as a small team. I will say now we have agency support, and they're helping us with social media, and that they've helped us kind of step our game up. But during the height of it was really just us.
All right. Awesome. So related to your team, I've got a question from Tom. So he says that we keep saying team for our tiny groups, and he's glad to know that he's not alone in doing that. So he has a team of about 6 people, and what seemed like an impossible task this past year working in government, partially on some of those mask and distance issues, like I mentioned before. What do you think your team could have most benefited from this past year in terms of maybe help or resources?
That's a great question, Tom. And kudos to you for having a small but mighty team as well. I think there were, and I think I'm starting to see this more now that, things are like a little bit slower paced. There were things that we probably could have been doing just from an organizational perspective in terms of like trackers, spreadsheets, lists, our media lists being updated versus like, me like writing things down on a piece of paper and having that on my desk. So I think there were, just like your classical, things that you do to manage media relations that we were just kind of not necessarily doing, because we were such a small team. So I think that, and then I think probably more content wise, it would have been great if for every press release we had some sort of video to go along with it that would explain what we were, like I was saying, like they were so scientific. So it would have been great to have an accessible video that made the science or the message really come through to the general public or the general consumer. So I think those 2 things probably stick out the most to me.
Okay, that makes complete sense. And Tom says, yeah, it's a great answer. So, all right. So I think we're going to wrap up the Q&A unless there's any more with this last question from Lori, which I think is a great way to conclude this. So what were some of your unexpected learnings or experiences that will alter how your company communicates going forward? Really just honing in on maybe 1 or 2 of the top learnings from this time.
Yeah, I think number 1, first and foremost, is transparency. We were the first company to release our phase 3 protocol, which was pretty unheard of in biotech, which helped people understand like how we were measuring the vaccine efficacy, what the safety signals we were looking at. And then we were also one of the leaders in putting out our phase 3 diversity numbers. Every week we would report out on how diverse our, the diverse population was in our phase 3. So I think that spirit of transparency and being able to almost like challenge ourselves to be like dramatically transparent, and getting comfortable in that space is something that I just don't see the company changing. And I think we all saw the benefit of that from a comms perspective, and from a trust perspective. So I think we will continue to be transparent, and then, really like nurture the trust that the public has in us with our communications. So I think transparency, first and foremost, is something that we will hold on to. That was a great learning from the experience that we had.
That's awesome. So that's great. So I just want to thank you, Colleen, so much for your time. This was great. This came from just like being curious and finding you. So thanks for being so willing to come speak with all of us. I know everyone definitely got a lot of great information from this.